You're looking for a dough sheeter that actually lets you keep up with a rush of orders, doesn't take a whole day to learn, and feels like a solid investment rather than a fancy gadget you'll ignore after a few weeks. You've probably tried rolling pins, hand crank rollers, or even a kitchen stand mixer with a dough hook, only to end up with uneven crusts, wasted dough, or a sore forearm. That hesitation is real. Spend a few $100s on something that promises professional results, and you risk getting a machine that's either too fragile for a busy kitchen or too complicated to fit into your workflow. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. In this review, I'm going to walk through what the VEVOR commercial pizza dough press actually does for a pizzeria, a food truck, or an ambitious home chef, and why the value isn't just in the headline numbers. First off, the biggest question most buyers have is whether this 18-inch electric sheeter can handle the volume you throw at it without breaking down. The unit is built around a heavy-duty motor that can flatten dough from 0 up to 0.43 inches in thickness, which covers everything from ultra-thin New York-style slices to thicker, pan-style pies. In a real-world scenario, I've seen a small batch pizzeria that pulls about 80 pies a night use the same model to prep dough in 10-minute bursts. The machine's continuous roll belt keeps the dough moving, so there's no need to stop, reposition, or manually feed the sheet each time. That steady flow translates directly into less labor cost and a more predictable line during peak hours. If you're a home cook who only makes a pizza or two on the weekend, you might wonder if the size is overkill. The 18-inch width does mean you can lay down a full-size crust in one pass, which is great if you like the classic round shape, but it also means the footprint on a countertop is fairly large. For a compact kitchen, you'll need a dedicated spot near a power outlet, and you'll have to consider the 45-pound weight when you move it for cleaning. Those are the hidden trade-offs that often get glossed over in product blurbs. Now, let's talk about how the thickness adjustment actually feels when you're using it. The dial on the side lets you set the roller gap in small increments, which is helpful when you're experimenting with different crust styles. In practice, a dough shop owner told me they set the machine to a thinner setting for a thin and crispy menu item, then nudged it up a notch for a chewy edge version without having to change any rollers or manually stretch the dough. The consistency is especially noticeable when you compare a hand-rolled crust that can vary by a 1/4 inch to a sheet that stays within a millimeter of the target thickness. That level of control reduces dough shrinkage, which means you waste less product and your toppings sit more evenly. Who should definitely consider this machine? If you run a commercial kitchen, a food truck, or a high-volume home-based bakery where you're pulling more than a dozen dough rounds per hour, the VEVOR's ability to keep the workflow moving without constant manual intervention is a real time saver. It's also a solid pick for anyone who wants to expand their menu to include larger, 18-inch specialty pies. Think deep dish or stuffed crusts without having to buy a separate larger roller. The durability claim isn't just marketing fluff. The housing is steel reinforced, and the rollers are made from food-grade stainless steel that resists rust even after frequent cleaning. On the flip side, if your pizza making is more of a hobbyist activity, say you bake a couple of pies on Saturday nights, you'll likely find the machine's size and power overkill. The initial cost is higher than a hand crank roller, and you'll need to factor in the space it occupies. Additionally, the machine does require a steady 110-volt supply, so if your kitchen is limited to a few outlets, you might need an extension cord or a dedicated circuit, which adds a bit of hassle. A practical weakness that shows up after the first few weeks is the belt tension. The rollers are driven by a belt that can stretch a little over time, especially if you run the machine at the highest speed setting for long periods. In a commercial setting, this isn't a deal breaker because you can tighten the belt with a simple Allen key, but it does add a small maintenance step you need to be aware of. Another point to consider is the cleaning routine. Because the dough sheet passes through a narrow gap, you have to scrape off any excess flour or dough residue before wiping the rollers. It's not a nightmare, but it does mean you'll spend a few extra minutes after each shift to keep the machine humming smoothly. What about the claim of less shrinkage, easier forming? In practice, that translates to dough that holds its shape after it's rolled out. When you're making a large pizza with a thin base, the dough often springs back or folds,